Dear students, welcome back to my channel. So here in this session we can understand Spring Boot CRUD application. So CRUD stands for Create, Read, Update and Delete Operations. These are the four basic actions that is used to work with the data in databases or any storage system. So in Spring Boot, CRUD mapping refers to how these HTTP methods, that is post, get, put and delete, are mapped to controller methods to perform create, read, update and delete operations in database making use of RESTful API. So we have a list of HTTP methods and post that perform create operation. Get can be used to read the records. Put method can be used to update existing record. Delete method can be used to delete an existing record. So these are all these operations can be mapped with this Spring Boot by making use of a list of annotations. In terms of post operation, we have at post mapping annotation. For get operation, we have at get mapping. For put operation, we have at put mapping. For deletion, we have at delete mapping. So here, post mapping can be used to add a new record in an existing database table. Get mapping that can be used to read list of resources from the database. Put mapping can be used to update an existing record. Delete mapping can be used to remove an existing record. So we have a list of layers. So first one controller, second one service, then repository and entity. So here the Spring Boot architecture has been defined by making use of a list of layers. Controller is the presentation layer that can handle all the HTTP requests. So we have to give the annotation at rest to controller that will makes that particular application as a controller. Next one, we have service that contains business logic. By making use of at service annotation, we can define that particular class as a service class. Next one, repository. So that is a data access layer that can directly interact with this database server for the implementation of CRUD operation. By making use of at repository, we can make use of that particular class as a repository. Next one, we have an entity. So here it is going to represent an object. So here the Java class that can be mapped to the database table by making use of an entity at entity. Next one, a Spring Boot architecture overview. So we have a client. A client can be a web browser or REST client or a mobile app. So here the client can send the HTTP request that will be forwarded to this controller layer, that is the presentation layer, and that is going to handle the HTTP request. Now we have the service layer. There we can have the entire business logic can be implemented. We can have the validation process and we can have this how this data can be retrieved from this database server. All these logics can be implemented in service layer. Followed by we have the repository layer, that is the data access layer, and that is going to interact with this database server to fetch the records. Then repository layer can directly interact with this database server and that can get back the response to this controller that will be used. The controller is going to give back the response as a JSON format to the end user. So this is the Spring Boot application architecture. So here we have the list of layers, that is a controller, service and repository. So here from this client, it can be a postman. So that is going to send the request to this controller, that is the presentation layer. So here this request can be directly forwarded to either service layer or repository. So repository is the data access layer that is going to interact with this database directly and get back the response to this controller back. That will be given as a JSON format to this end user. So we have DTO stands for data transfer object. It is a plain Java object that is used to transfer the data between different layers. Next one, this is the folder structure when we are going to create a Spring Boot application. So we are having different folders. There is a controller to handle this HTTP request. Then we're having student controller.java, then service for the implementation of business logic, where we have the class name called student service.java. Then repository, there is a data access layer that is going to interact with this database server. We have the class name called student repository.java. It is an interface that has the extension of JPA repository. Next one, we have the model that is going to represent an object. So here this Java class that can be mapped as a table in our database. And finally, we have this demo application.java. There we have this main method for the execution of entire application can be initiated from this particular application. Now let us describe very briefly about each one of these objects. First one, entity class. So let us have an example of entity, for example, student. So here the student has the list of attributes describing the student ID, name and email address. So here we are making use of two annotation at entity and at ID. So here this at entity annotation that will map this particular Java class as a table in our database, and one of these IDs, one of these attributes in this particular class student has been made as a primary key. So for that we are making use of this annotation at ID. So here an entity class is a simple Java class that can represent a table in the database, and each object of the class can be a number of rows in the table, and here each field or each attribute in the class can represent column in the table. So it is marked with at entity annotation. So Spring JPA knows it should be stored in the database as a student table. Followed by we are having a list of getter and setter methods to update this attribute of this class student, and we can have the list of constructors. Now let us understand what is repository interface. So here in this example, we have an interface name called student repository, that is the user defined interface that extends JPA repository, followed by what is the name of the table name called table name, that is student, and what is the data type of this primary key, that is we have given long. Now it has been annotated as at repository. So here we are going to make this particular interface as a repository. So that is going to interact with your database server. And here we are going to make use of the list of predefined methods of the JPA repository in our application. Say for example, save that is used to create a record, find all to list out all the records from the backend server. Find by ID, we are going to retrieve a single record based on this ID, and delete by ID, we are going to delete a record based on this given ID that is received from the end user. So a repository in Spring Boot is a special interface that handles the database operations for an entity like saving or reading or updating or deleting the data. So without using SQL queries. So it is usually an interface, not a class. So it extends a JPA repository for the implementation of CRUD operations. So you automatically get all the CRUD methods, and Spring Data JPA creates the implementation for you at runtime. Next one, let us understand what is service layer. So here in this example, we have a class name called student service. There we have two annotations. First one at service, second one at auto-wired. So here at service makes this particular class as a service class that is going to have the business logic. The entire business logic can be implemented here. Next one auto-wired. So here we are going to create an instance of student repository. So here this object can be created automatically. Followed by we are having a list of user defined methods in this class name called student service, that is save the student and get all students, then get the student by ID, then delete the student. So here each method has the implementation here. So first one, save method, I'm going to return repository.save. So save is the predefined methods of JP repository. There we are going to save the student object in our backend server. So that will return what is the object that has been saved successfully to this controller. Next one, we have this get all method. There we have the implementation of find all. This is one of the predefined methods of JP repository. There we are going to retrieve all the records available in this backend server. Next one, find by ID. So here this method either can return if the record is available, or else it is going to return null if the record is not available in the database server. Next one, delete by ID. We are going to remove the record based on this ID which is received from the end user. So here a service in Spring Boot is a class where you write the business logic of your application. The actual rules or steps your programs follows. So it sits between the controller and repository. It helps keep the controller clean by moving logic into the separate layer. So it can be marked with at service annotation. So Spring knows it is a service component. So instead of writing this entire business logic in our controller, we can have a separate layer that is a service layer. Then we can have the implementation of our entire business logic. So next one, controller. A controller in Spring Boot is a class that handles incoming HTTP request. So like get, post, put, delete, or all the operations can be received from this web browser. And here this controller has been defined as at rest controller. It maps this URL to Java methods using annotations like at get mapping, at post mapping for the different operations of read the data from the database and post mapping to create a new record in our database. And also we can make use of at put mapping to update the existing record, and at delete mapping can be used to delete the existing record in our database table. It talks to the service or repository to get the work done, then sends back a response to this web browser as a JSON format of data. So let us describe the controller application here. So first one, we have an annotation called as at rest controller and at request mapping followed by an endpoint students. Then we have the class name called student controller. Then we have another annotation that is auto-wire that is going to create an instance for student service. Next one, post mapping. For creating a new record, we can make use of post operation. So the annotation used here is at post mapping. So here add is one of the user defined method in our class name called student controller. There we are going to read the data from this end user by making use of the annotation at request body followed by object name called student. So here this particular annotation that can convert this JSON format data to a Java format. So that is known as the concept of deserialization. So here we have this method implementation as return service.save. So here this request will be forwarded to the service layer. There we have the implementation of a save method from this JP repository to store the record in our database server. Next one, we have the get mapping to list out the entire records from our existing table. So here a list is the method of user defined method in student controller has the implementation of service.getAll. So this is one of the methods has been defined in service layer and has the implementation of a pre-built method that is getAll that is going to retrieve all the records by making use of findAll method. The findAll method will retrieve all the records available from our database server. So that is one of the predefined methods of JP repository. Next one, get mapping followed by an ID. So here we have these endpoints as students followed by the given ID. I want to retrieve a single record. So here we are going to call get by ID of this service layer. There we are going to retrieve the methods of this JPA repository to retrieve the particular record available in our database table. And next one, put mapping. For the updation, we can make use of this annotation, put mapping followed by this ID. So here we are going to set a new ID. So in this ID, I'm going to save a new record. That is, we are retrieving from this request to body. That is student object. We are going to overwrite an existing data of this student ID. So in this particular student ID, I will rewrite a new information to this particular record. Next one, add delete mapping followed by ID. So here, based on this ID, we are going to remove the record from this existing table. So here we are making use of an annotation name called at path variable. So here path variable can be used to read a data from our URL. So based on this ID, we are going to delete that particular record from our existing table. So how it works? So user send a request by making use of Postman or web browser or front-end app. Now the controller is going to catch the request and calls either repository or service layer. Now repository can talk to the database server to perform all these CRUD operations, and the result is sent back to the end user as a JSON format. For example, for different operations, we are using different methods. To create a new student, we have the method name called post followed by the endpoint students. Then get all students, we have the method get followed by the endpoint students. Then get student with ID 1. So in this URL, we are going to give the method type as get followed by students and ID number is 1. Then to update the student record, we have put is the method followed by endpoint students and the record number is 1. And to delete a record with the ID, we have this method name called delete followed by students and ID number is 1. Let us describe very briefly about CRUD annotations. So in controller layer, we have list of annotation. First one, add REST controller. So here this will mark the class as a REST API controller that returns JSON or XML data. Next one, add request mapping followed by the endpoint students. So this sets the base URL path for all the methods in the class. Post mapping handles HTTP post request. That is, we are going to create a new data. Next one, add get mapping handles HTTP get request to read a record from the existing table. Next one, add put mapping handles HTTP put request that is used to update the record. Add delete mapping handles HTTP delete request to delete the record. Then add request body. This will convert incoming JSON from the request into a Java object. So here the conversion from JSON to Java is known as deserialization. Next one, the use of add path variable that takes a value directly from the URL and assign it to the method variable. Next one, in terms of service layer, we have a list of annotation. First one, add service. So this will marks the class as a service that holds the business logic. Next one, add auto-wire, that is automatically injects an object without creating it manually. Next one, in terms of repository layer, we have list of annotations. Add repository that will mark the class as a database access layer. Then we have JPA repository. So in our interface, we are going to extend JPA repository that gives you ready-made CRUD database methods without writing SQL. So thank you, students. I hope you understand the concept of CRUD implementation of Spring Boot application. Thank you so much.